So the goal here is to get you started with using GitHub for version control. And to put that another way, we're going to create a Git repository that's hosted on GitHub. As you can see, I'm logged into my personal GitHub account. Across the top is a menu bar with options for overview, repositories, projects, packages, etc. Since we want to create a new Git repository, we're going to select the repositories option from the navigation menu. When we click on that repositories menu item, it takes us to the list of repositories for our account. I've got a whole bunch of them already, 49 to be exact. Above the list of repositories, there's a box that will let us search for a repository by name, plus a handful of other filtering options. On the far right of that cluster of controls is a button that says New. This is the Create New Repository button. Clicking on that New button takes us to this page. This is the Create a New Repository page, and there are a whole bunch of available options. We'll start off at the top and work our way down to the bottom where the Create Repository button lives. The first thing to notice is this Owner drop-down box that currently says Choose an Owner. Opening this drop-down shows us the list of possible owners for this new Git repository. This might look significantly different for you, and I'll talk about that in a moment. For me, this is showing me 4 different options for owner. The first one that says Bende is my personal GitHub account. That's where I started this demo from. Then there's the line that says Bende Inc. That's my company's account. Then I've got 2 items that are kind of grayed out, Microsoft MVP and Scrum.org. Taken all together, this is the list of accounts or organizations where my account has some kind of permissions. For the first 2, the Bende items, it probably won't surprise you to find out that I own them and therefore have lots of permission to do stuff. For the bottom 2, I have permissions to do something, but I don't have the permission to create new Git repositories. For this demo, I'm going to create this repository so that it's owned by my personal account. So I'll select that item from the list, and now the owner field is set to Bende. Next to owner is the name box. This is where we'll enter the name that we want to use for this new repository. I'm going to call this repository Hello World. Actually, more precisely, I'm going to call this Hello-World. Spaces aren't allowed in a repository's name, so I'm substituting a dash where I would have put a space. After I enter the name, I get the message that says Hello World is available. The repository name has to be unique for the chosen owner, and if there were already a Hello World repo in my account, it would have told me to pick something else. I just clicked the tab key a couple of times and put my cursor in the description box. The name value is required, and the owner value is required. The description field, on the other hand, is entirely optional. To be honest, I very often will just leave this blank. But in this case, I'm going to actually set a description that says my first GitHub repository. So the owner, name, and description are set, and the next item below that is visibility. I'll just open the visibility drop-down box. And now we can see the options, public or private. Public repositories are visible to pretty much everyone. Put another way, anyone can see that it exists and anyone can access the contents. And because of the way that Git works, this means that they can see the history of every file that's ever been in this repository. Any person can read the contents, but you still get to control who can write to the repository. The private option means that you control who knows the repository exists, who can read the contents, and who can write to it. Without getting into too much detail, there are major feature differences between public and private repos. GitHub has always been a champion of open source projects, and if your repository is public, you get a lot more features for free. If the repository is private, you might find that you have to pay actual money for some of the features you might want. That said, if you have any doubt about what kind of access you want the world to have to your repository, start with private mode. For this demo, I'm choosing to keep the repository visibility in public mode. I'm going to skip over the Start with a Template option, and that takes us to the Add a README config option. I'm going to set this to On. What this means is that when the new repository is created, it'll get a file right in the root of the repository called README. The default README file is going to be pretty much empty, but you can add details to it so that people who come to your repo can quickly understand the details and contents. I almost always create a README file, and there's not a lot of downside for creating it, even if you think you'll leave it empty. Next is the Add a gitignore file option. Currently, it's set to not create a gitignore file. This is another one of those topics where, for right now, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. The quickie version of what a gitignore file is that it's, well, a list of files that Git should ignore and not track if it sees them. If I click on this drop down and open it up, there are about a half zillion options. Depending on what technology you're going to be working with and or what kind of files you intend to manage, you might want to add a gitignore file. The super short version of why you'd ever want to ignore files goes something like this. Depending on your technology choice, there are going to be files that you care about and files that you don't care about. Almost every technology creates some temporary working files and folders that are used to facilitate your work in that moment, and once whatever operation you've just done is, well, done, those temp files are useless. A gitignore file describes the list of which files can be safely ignored. GitHub helpfully gives you a list of default gitignore files for all these technologies. I'm going to be doing demo videos using C# and .NET. So for this tech, I'll search for Visual Studio. So I'll pick Visual Studio from the gitignore list. And now, when the repository gets created, there will be a gitignore file in my repository that's ready to go for development with Visual Studio and C#. By the way, if you create your repository and then don't see the gitignore file even though you asked for one, it could be your file visibility settings. For example, on Mac and Linux, any file that starts with a dot is hidden by default. I've been saying gitignore, but the file name really actually is .gitignore. Therefore, it might be hidden. Then there's the license option. This is another one of those things that GitHub helps you with by providing you with possible default values. In this case, this allows you to drop in a document describing the license you want for your code. There are a whole mess of options for licensing of open source software in this list. The topic of open source licenses is super duper out of scope for this demo, so I'm going to leave this as no license. Just know that there are options. Another option that you have is to populate your repository with info that could be helpful for use by Copilot AI. Once again, entirely out of scope for this demo, and I'm going to skip over it. And that takes us down to the final item on this page, the Create Repository button. Once you've got the options on this screen set to your liking, click the Create Repository button, triggers the work of actually creating your new repository. I'll just click that button right now and start the Create operation. The Create operation runs and drops us onto the landing page for our new repository. And since we created a README file, it's displaying the contents of that README. It's also showing the list of files that are in our new repository. In this case, gitignore and the readme.md file. Before I wrap up this demo, I'll point out where to go to start actually using this repository. Clicking this code button shows us some key details about the repository. The one that you probably care the most about is the URL for the repo. This is a super important value that I'll show you how to use in the next demo. But while I'm here, I'll point out that there's this handy dandy button to the right of the URL that copies the URL value to your clipboard so that you can paste it into other tools. I'll click that button and now I've got the URL in my clipboard and it's ready to be used. And there you have it. It's our new Hello World Git repository and it's ready for us to use. Over the next couple of videos, I'll show you how to start using this with Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio. Stay tuned for more.